start with my number 10. My number 10 is undoubtedly going to show up on the list later on. It's Link's Awakening. I kind of just combine the two together, the Game Boy / Game Boy Color, and then the Switch remake for it. I think it's a good game, and I would like it a lot better if I grew up playing it.
And that's where I remember that was my first Zelda game, which is why for me it's going to skyrocket right to the top. But my number 10 is the most recent one I played, and I kept it down there to try and avoid recency bias because I think objectively I might have put it higher up, but I feel like the way it took the Game Boy and kind of pushed it to its limits, and that's where, as we're going to talk about next in Minish Cap, where, as I was saying, like the pixel art is phenomenal. I was actually blown away by how much detail they got into some of those pixels in like Oracle of Seasons, like the final boss. I'm like, holy crap, I am literally on top of a dragon that is slamming the ground, jumping on top of it and like jumping off of it to slash its head. And I was not expecting that from a 2D Zelda game, especially like a sequel to Link's Awakening. But even though I enjoy Link's Awakening way more, there was a lot of like novel things that I enjoyed about Seasons. And I think the other part of it was my recency of having just played Ages, which I did not enjoy. And I felt like Seasons I could have actually played through without a guide to get most of the things.
Yeah, it has more of a, this item, okay, I remember in my head, okay, well, this is what this person wanted.
Yeah,
what's that over here?
When I was in a dungeon and I picked up a new item, like the magnetic gloves, I'm like, I remember seeing spots on the overworld where that would become useful. And I didn't have to follow along with a guide saying, here's all of the things you can collect now that you have the magnetic gloves. I remembered most of them. And because I was playing that linked game after doing Ages, I already had a full heart container extra. So I wasn't too concerned about having missed those 4 extra hearts in my playthrough. And I got the extra final boss at the end, which just made it that as an extra little bit of novel and exciting. I was really glad I did play both of them ultimately, but Seasons I really enjoyed. Ages might have been my least favorite Zelda that I've ever played.
Yeah. And if not that, at least ones that you beat, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, Seasons for me, it's not on my list because I've never officially beat it. I borrowed it from a friend 15 years ago, I want to say, give or take. Played through first 7 or so dungeons of it in a weekend and then gave it back to him Monday at school. So it's like, I enjoy it. If I were to have played it, it might make the list, but a little bit different to kind of gauge around. I do think it's better than Ages. I tried playing Ages and I just couldn't get into it.
Mm-hmm. And I think moving on to number 9, my number 9 pick was Minish Cap. And I think, although I was just raving about how Seasons just looked so good, there was nothing I could have done that Minish Cap didn't do better. And I think the only draw against Minish Cap for me was just kind of how short it was. But again, I really felt that in the overworld when I saw things, I understood when I picked up an item in a dungeon exactly what I had to do. I think the first time I played it, the mole mitts was like where I got stuck for a minute because I didn't realize the actual shape of the things in the side of the rock meant that you could dig in there. So I wandered around for hours before eventually like looking up where to go. And but other than that, because this was also maybe 10 years ago I played it the first time.
Yeah.
But other than that, I very thoroughly enjoyed it.
See, now, do you think that's something that is better because it's a 2D game versus a 3D game, knowing where to go items wise?
I think for me, like my list is going to be half and half, but I think the 3D ones really enrapture you in that world, but the 2D ones, something about it really clicks in my brain where I remember the little details. I remember seeing that in that corner of that shop.
Yeah.
Whereas in the 3D ones,
it's almost too much to kind of change perspective.
And I love the stories they tell more, but I just love the gameplay in the 2Ds more.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I'm more skewed towards the 3Ds, as we'll see, but I definitely enjoy a good 2D Zelda. My number 9 hot take city, as always, is Majora's Mask.
Boo! Boo!
I notoriously have issues with the game, and it's ultimately just down to gameplay mechanics. I'm someone who's really taken out of a game if I don't enjoy certain aspects of it. It could be the best game ever, but if there's something that I personally have an issue with, it's always going to knock down. With Majora's Mask, that's just the time element of it. With the time element, it's cool, but for me, it just adds an added layer of stress. In terms of story, in terms of gameplay, in terms of world, excellent, but because of that, that's always going to draw back from me.
And that's what made me feel like connected to the people is they're not on my time. I am on their time. Mm-hmm. And that really made me like care about the people more. And I'm sure there's dozens of video essays online about people trying to debate that back and forth, but just seeing like the postman would be here at these times and knowing that in advance and trying to plan when you're going to be there to pick up a heart piece or interact with him, just really like it was stressful, but in a way where I'm like almost like teaching me how to manage and budget my time in real life.
Yeah, it's an efficiency kind of thing, right? Whereas I just feel like my loss of progress, the constant loss of progress was really upsetting to me as a kid, being like almost at a thing and then the time runs out and then it's not enough. Then I have to start from the beginning again. Mm-hmm. But speaking of things that are disappointing now in hindsight, my number 8 is Breath of the Wild. And if we had done this show last year, probably way up on our lists.
Like before Tears of the Kingdom?
Before Tears of the Kingdom came out.
What about like right after Tears of the Kingdom came out?
Right after Tears of the Kingdom came out, I think I have the same mindset. Because I think Tears of the Kingdom is just the better game. But Breath of the Wild was such a breath of fresh air when it came out. Mm-hmm. Right. I have elements that I don't enjoy with it. I find that the dungeons are a little bit lacking. I think the beasts are really cool, but I just wanted something a little bit more to sink my teeth into combat wise. But in terms of exploration, in terms of the story, it was just, it's more of a minimalist take I find on the Zelda structure, but I think it works. And it's something that makes this style of RPG more enjoyable. There was something really nice to be able to just come home from work, spend an hour or two just exploring and seeing what you could find. It was refreshing to not have as many icons and layers of it to just kind of go to location A, location B, location C. It's, I see this cool thing, I want to go, and then I just go and see what happens.
And that was a really cool part of the like promotional material too, was like, was it Miyamoto that was on there saying, it might have been Eiji Aonuma, the Zelda director, with the original video saying like, that mountain back there, if I see it, I can get to it. And there was so much speculation online about like how big that map was going to be, how they're going to make that happen. And when we found out afterwards that that entire gameplay demo was pretty much just on like the plateau.
Yeah.
And you could go all the way to Death Mountain. You could go all the way to Zora's River. And like there was entire cities and stuff there that weren't visible to you originally. That was a really cool idea.
Yeah. And don't quote me on size of it. I believe it wound up being something like 17 times the size of Twilight Princess, which at the time was a huge map.
And I remember there being comparisons, like how many times bigger or close to equal it was to things like Skyrim or like GTA 5, where, like, obviously I think about something like Just Cause as a game series. I'm like, those are just enormously huge maps for the sake of being enormous and huge.
Yeah.
But this one was so filled with detail. And I think it was an important step for Zelda to take because it showed that it's not just going to be limited to the same structure that people are getting tired of by Skyward Sword, and that 3D Zelda can evolve in its own direction, while 2D can evolve in its own direction.
It's the concept of looking back to go forward, right? I know they took a lot of inspiration from the very first Legend of Zelda, just with that unknowingness and just okay, let's just explore and see what's out there. And just quick last point before we go on, I think easily this would have been top 5 before Tears of the Kingdom came out on my list.
I think mine would have probably fit in right where Tears of the Kingdom is now. It's just, if I have to put them side by side, I objectively think that Tears of the Kingdom is a better game.
Me too.
And obviously it loses that sort of novelty, that first time impact. But the reason I put it on my list and left Breath of the Wild off, even though objectively I could have put them as like number 3 and 4 and it would have made sense in terms of just the quality of game, but they're almost so similar that I kind of felt like I only wanted to include one because now that both of them exist, there's only one of them I'm going to go back to.
Yes. Yeah, I will find myself going back to Tears of the Kingdom. I don't know about Breath of the Wild. Ultimately, Breath of the Wild made it on my list because I really like the concept of being wowed in video games. And I've found as I've gotten older, it happens less and less. Right. And Breath of the Wild is really the first time that I've started getting back into it when 2017, when it came out, and you exit the little tomb area where Link is and you just see the scope of the world and they pan around. That's the first time I remember for a long time going just audibly wow with it.
Mm-hmm. And I think a moment that happened for a lot of people that made them all stop and go wow, it's going to be my number 8. Ocarina of Time, maybe that's a hot take because obviously I'm going to put Majora's Mask much higher, but for me, Ocarina of Time, I think was obviously like a landmark title, but just like how I think Tears of the Kingdom came in, improved on like the assets that Breath of the Wild had and made it just into an overall better game. I feel like Ocarina of Time was absolutely mind-blowing, absolutely phenomenal, and its importance in gaming history cannot be understated. You're going to find like people raving about it left, right, and center for until the end of time, pretty much. But I just think I love playing through this story again now, but I don't feel any sort of compulsion to go back and 100% complete it. I am interested in trying out like randomizers, and I know that that's part of why it's higher up on your list.
Yeah, randomizers I think completely changed the game with a lot of Zeldas. Certain ones just play better to it and it just vastly improves replayability.
And I also did have an interest in speedrunning, and I did want to learn about speedrunning in Ocarina of Time, and I was trying to learn some things there because I thought learning those tricks would have really made doing the randomizers a lot of fun, is being able to do it with the glitches and out of sequence and things like that. I just never put that amount of time in, and at this point I don't know if I will be bothered to, but if I was just left me alone with Ocarina of Time, I'm going to have a great time going through it again.
Yeah. The nice part about this list is for the vast majority of it, it's just good times all around.
Now,
with that being said, though, like the thing with Ocarina of Time is its influence, right? And getting into it more is it's like Z targeting and anything like that. Things that are in gaming now. It's like maybe another game would have absolutely done it, but it's nice that so many of them came from Ocarina of Time.
Mm-hmm. And moving on to my number 7, which is going to be A Link to the Past, which again, you're going to have a little bit higher because of your personal backstory with it. But for me, I didn't actually play it on Super Nintendo until I was almost an adult. So I had already played Ocarina of Time. I'd played Majora's Mask, even Wind Waker at that point, and maybe even Twilight Princess. And so I played through Link to the Past finally all the way after playing those games. And I think the reason I'm putting it above Ocarina of Time is just because playing through a 2D game is just a much more constant. You're moving, always picking things up. And I feel like just getting around the map just feels quicker. And just the mechanics of 2D are a lot simpler to just pick up and play. And I think if you're looking at just the overall history of Zelda, it's the first really, truly phenomenal Zelda game. Because it was the third one to ever come out, and the first 2 are very endearing to go back to. But unless they do find a way to maybe come out with a very from the ground up remake, I don't see myself playing them again and again.
Yeah, Link to the Past is definitely the first one that has a little bit more of that replay value, has a little bit more polish, I want to say, on it. Like, for when the first two games came out, they're outstanding games, but the issues with Zelda 2 are pretty well documented, it just being such a far cry from the first one that I don't think they really knew what they had, and two, what they really wanted to do with Link and Zelda as characters.
And Link to the Past really established what we think of as a Zelda game and a Zelda world today.
Yeah.
Like, it was the first time that we had this concept of go into the dungeons and, like, obviously you get the item, and maybe that was present in the first one, but just the idea of, like, having, like, that compass and that map that really, defines, like, the 2D Zelda, and just, like, the way the dungeons are laid out for, like, Link's Awakening and the Oracle of Seasons and Ages, Minish Cap. Like, it feels like iterating on what Link to the Past brought new to the table. And that's where, like, I really appreciate it for that aspect. And I think, like, I put it above Seasons maybe because it was the first one to do it. And I think its world was perfectly designed for that.
Yeah. And just the fact that it managed to do a light world and a dark world, I think, on a Super Nintendo console is just mind-blowing. It's very much like Pokemon Silver and Gold having Kanto in it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's mind-blowing, how did you manage to do this kind of thing?
And again, like, another thing that became sort of a staple of Zelda games moving forward is having that two different, like, back and forth worlds. And again, especially in the 2D ones, because Seasons and Ages took that concept and ran with it.
Yeah. Even something like Minish Cap going from big to small, right? Most of them do just kind of tweak the formula, right?
Mm-hmm.
But a fun one for my number 7 is it's going to be Twilight Princess. And Twilight Princess is one of those what if games for me, because I just do not like the beginning. I find the tutorial portion to just be far too long, and it takes too long for the game to get going. But once it does, I think it's a fantastic game.
And I would agree that it is a fantastic game. And I think just the fact that I played it right when it first came out, but I didn't finish it at that time because I got bored at the start. And it wasn't until I went back to it 4 or 5 years later and actually gave it that thorough chance that I was like, wow, like, this is a great game. But I don't think I was ever compelled enough into it that I would have ever ended up putting it on my top 10 list.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, it's the same kind of thing if you're watching a TV show or you're reading a book and people tell you, okay, but just wait until, like, season 2, wait until 150, 160 pages in. And you're like, is that worth it?
And by the time you get, like, the double claw shot or the ball and chain even the beetle in, like, the first dungeon.
Yeah.
Or is that the second dungeon? First dungeon, second dungeon? The first one's the Gale Boomerang.
Yeah.
So whenever you get the beetle, like, those are all fantastic, like, one-offs too. Like, I think it has some of the best items and the most fun to use items. I just didn't really feel compelled to get to the next areas because it was just so much empty space.
Yes. Yeah. It has kind of the bad side of what I'm glad Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom didn't have, which is just, it's a big open world and not a lot in it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Even Ocarina of Time felt like it had more in its Hyrule's field space than Twilight Princess has in its. But in terms of dungeons and items and characters, and the fact that for most of the game you don't necessarily know that Ganon is still going to be the big bad, right? Having it be Zant for a bit and having that whole thing between them and Midna and all that is just a really nice breath of fresh air compared to, I know I'm going to be against Ganon.
It is a very cool concept, and it's one that I think, like, say in Skyward Sword, people felt like it was a little disconnected from the main Zelda canon, but I really appreciated that about it, is that it is the origin story. It's before these conventions had been established in, like, canonically in the world itself. So, but again, with like Twilight Princess, I love that there's 10 dungeons, and I did really enjoy a lot of the dungeons and bosses. And as I said, I just couldn't get over how bored I was leading up to them.
Yes, if I had a way to make a save and always load from after you become Wolf Link, done. I would play that game constantly, but I can't, so it's just up there because I do really like it. It's just being able to get through the beginning portion. And in kind of the flip side, the only game that's on our list in the same spot at number 6 is Wind Waker.
Ironically, another game where you're mostly spending time in big empty space getting from place to place, but there's a reason I put this one on my list and Twilight Princess didn't make it. And I think it's the fact that it came first and I played through it first, and just the sheer beauty of the world. And I think Twilight Princess stuck to that mature style in a response to the reception from Wind Waker. But obviously, looking at it 10 years later, Wind Waker's art style still holds up. And I think the character charm, it really holds up. So for me, the big difference between one making the list and not was I want to be in the world of Wind Waker. Even when I'm just sailing, I'm having a much better time. Like, that's more interesting to me than just holding up on a joystick.
Yeah, definitely going through with the on the King of Red Lions is a little bit more enjoyable because you do have to watch out for sharks and you do find little outposts and things like that. And it's a little bit more to it than just the vast empty space of, well, I hope I can just Wolf Link or Epona around.
And I think everyone can agree that once you do the Tower of the Gods, so like Dragon Roost Island and the Fire Temple there, absolutely phenomenal. By the time you're facing Goma, like I get goosebumps thinking about that moment and just like the effects of like the fire and how they were able to really just bring out that in the GameCube versus the games that came before it. But I didn't feel like I saw that sort of thing in Twilight Princess to the same extent, where it wasn't.
No, Wind Waker still looks good now. Twilight Princess has the issue that a lot of games have that time period, which is just too much gray, too many browns.
Yeah, like the age of those third-person shooters.
Yeah, I always think Gears of War when I think of things like that, where it's just you've got brown on brown and maybe a little bit of green.
But it was realistic.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think the reason like Wind Waker is always going to stand out to me is just that it was like the first one. You're going to see that change in my list right now is I went from the ones I think objectively are just good games to the ones where I genuinely love the characters. Like when I see Medley for the first time on Dragon Roost Island, and I know that I'm going to have that experience later on. And I think obviously the game could have used that little extra time to refine it and maybe do the trio of dungeons before and a trio of dungeons after, because it very much just feels like it ends. Like they didn't know quite where to go with it. Like when you pull up to like the Jabu and it's pretty much just like, well, I went into hiding, here's your pearl. And I was like, you can tell somebody wanted to expand upon that. And it would have been cool to have like 3 different post Tower of the God dungeons that just wrap things up nicely and call back on the 3 spirits that you had rescued in the first half. But instead it was just a 2 and 2.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it is my first one where I love the characters, but it's at the bottom of the list because it does feel unfinished.
It seems like it's just before the time when Nintendo would take that little bit of extra time. Mm. And I know earlier games had been postponed and everything as well, but just having that little bit of extra polish would have just shot it up because the art style still looks good now. The gameplay is still fun now. And I think it has some of the best items in it too.
Mm-hmm. And now I'm going to segue on into my number 5. And this one is going to be my world I fell in love with. But I think the reason I'm putting this one above Wind Waker is I think Skyward Sword improved upon the complete feel of the game. Like, and it does have a very similar structure to something like Wind Waker, where it's like, there's 3 areas and 3 dungeons, but, and like 3 like elements, I guess you could say. And then after you, do those 3 areas, and like, it's a grass, fire, electricity, pretty much. And then you come back to those same 3 areas. And I think that's kind of like the same thing that Wind Waker's trying to do, but as it was only 2 and 2, not 3 and 3. And a lot of people, I understand why you might have felt that Skyward Sword was holding you by the hand and dragging you through. But I think the fact that it was just a blast to play through the dungeons. Like, the dungeons and the items that you get in those dungeons are some of the best in the series. And the overworlds, they might have got a little tiresome doing like a full hour or 2 puzzle to get to each dungeon. But I think it's not a game I want to play through hours and hours and hours in a row. But I'll do like, get to a dungeon, finish the dungeon, and then return to the sky, and I feel satisfied with that gameplay loop for that day. And then like the next day I'll come back and do the next area, the next dungeon.
Yeah, there's really good endpoints.
Mm-hmm. And that's something where, like a more open game like Link to the Past, it's so quick and so next. And I do really enjoy that about Link to the Past. But I think at the end of Skyward Sword, I was almost in tears, because just the connection you feel to the characters. Like, even if you're not a huge fan of Skyward Sword, you probably know who Groose is. You get to learn kind of about Zelda and why, like, I actually feel important, invested in the relationship that Zelda and Link have at the beginning. And when she goes missing, obviously it sets the whole series of events in motion. But when she is sacrificing herself at the end, spoilers, by the way, and pretty much saying like, I am going to wait here and sacrifice myself for like 1,000 years. Well, you go and like save the world, essentially. Like, I actually feel sad having to leave her there. And that was something that the only things above this on my list are the ones where I had more of a strong emotional connection.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot of people tend to really like this iteration of Link and Zelda. They find it's the most like normal, most realistic kind of relationship between the two.
Now, the motion controls, they can go just absolutely suck a big one, because like the amount of times you're readjusting your sensor and doesn't feel like it's working as it should. Or was it Skyward Sword that had the beetle? That's why I was confused. Did Twilight Princess have a beetle?
Twilight Princess had a beetle. I don't think it's the same kind of beetle.
Okay. It's the first one in Skyward Sword is where you get a beetle.
Yeah. Yeah, the beetle that kind of flies around. And
half the time, I don't feel like I'm in any control over that thing.
Yeah, so Skyward Sword is the second game, the final game that's not on my list, that is on Zack's. And the main reason, one petty, one not, the motion controls suck, and it really takes you out of the game. And like, I just want to be able to actually swing a sword when I swing a sword, or have an option to hit an A button or something like that. My petty reason for not liking Skyward Sword is it's the first game where they completely and entirely changed Link's handedness. It's the first game where Link's right-handed. Every other game, at least one version of it, he's left-handed.
I was going to say, because obviously the only reason they changed it's like flipped the Wii version of Twilight Princess was for that.
Yeah, and it didn't help me out much.
No. I've never actually played Twilight Princess on GameCube, so I think it would be weird, because I think the remaster is also the GameCube orientation.
I think so.
So that would be really weird for me to go and play, but I definitely want to do that one soon.
And I believe it's flipped. I think everything is flipped around as well. But my number 5, and this gets into like, everything from here on out to me is just solid games. At the low end, maybe a 9. And that's going to be Link Between Worlds. One, It's a sequel to one of my favorite games, and it's a nice way to revisit the world, but it doesn't feel like it's just replaying Link to the Past. And that's a big thing, is it managed to keep it fresh. It managed to be a completely new experience.
And I'm going to put this one even above Link to the Past myself, because I that's what I was saying. I felt like Link to the Past was a great introduction to these mechanics, but Link Between Worlds feels like a real full story with characters that I care about, and it just stuck more in my brain than the setting of like Link to the Past did.
Yeah.
But I also did love how you have all these callbacks to places you would go in Link to the Past, and if you go to like the same place you get the flippers, they'll be like, oh, I don't know what you're talking about, flippers? Because there's a whole new mission that you do to get the flippers in like Link Between Worlds.
And if you know where things are from Link to the Past, there are still things to explore and to look at there in Link Between Worlds. If I had one gripe with the game, it's just how they did the item system.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just more, I like being able to have everything and not have it be a kind of, okay, well, now I've got to go back to this hub to do the next layer of things.
Well, and that's where we're going to disagree, but I'm going to save my thoughts and feelings for a few minutes here.
And you can absolutely do that while we go into my favorite handheld Zelda at number 4. That's going to be Minish Cap. We talked a little bit about it earlier. This one might just be recency bias because it is the most recent Zelda that I've played, but it's also, I think, just a top tier Zelda game. Like we said earlier, the graphics are quite good. It still holds up today. I think the fact that it's not done in-house is really interesting, and that it's still that kind of quality.
Yeah, was it Camelot?
Capcom?
Oh, Capcom, yeah. That sounds right. It might be, yeah, and it feels like that sort of Capcom quality you would have gotten on like Super Nintendo games, where it was like everything just kind of has that extra polish.
Exactly, yeah. It didn't feel like there was anything missing. The world felt very full. It didn't overstay its welcome. It didn't feel like I needed more with it. Getting into, again, the idea that I don't always want to see it end with Ganondorf or Gan and anything like that. That's always a nice touch.
And I think for me, like, obviously, I did love it enough to put it on my list, but the reason it's on the bottom of mine is because even though I love playing through the main story, I am not invested in those characters living in the world. Like the Pickery, none of them have any personality.
Yeah.
They're just copy-pasted dialogue, and everyone being like, wow, you're a Hylian, cool. And the fact that you have to talk to so many of them to get all these randomly generated kinstones to collect these figurines if you want to go for 100% completion means I have never 100% completed that game. And even though I crossed it off my backlog as complete, it's because I am never going to 100% complete that game, and I have just accepted that this is as complete as I want it to be.
Yeah. Yeah, unless you get a spare week and you've done everything else that you ever want to do with gaming. There's no need to go back into it. But I think it did a good job with the characters that are developed. I think they did a really good job with that. But also the dungeon design's really nice. The combat is actually relatively challenging. It's a Zelda game, so you're never super worried about dying unless you're going for more of a challenge run. But it's just nice that you do have to pay just a little bit more attention to it.
I think myself personally, I never actually died in it. Like, I didn't find myself stressing over whether I was going to die at any point, but I was also always carrying things like red potions on me.
Yeah, I notoriously don't do any of that.
Mm-hmm. And I think if you have everything you need, like a few fairies and red potions going into the end, you're never going to die.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't personally have that experience of it being a challenging game, but fun nevertheless.
Yeah.
But for me, my number 4, and this kind of hurts my old, like 12-year-old self who always swore this, like at one point, this was my favorite game of all time. and that is Majora's Mask. Now, you might be a big pee-pee poo-poo head who thinks that maybe we'll leave that one out. You are an opinionated adult who believes that the cycle system takes you out of it, but for me, it pulls me in and it keeps its like hooks in my brain permanently. Even after I have like reset the time, I don't feel like, oh, everything I did was useless and pointless. I'm like, if I want to go and have that feeling of like, wow, I saved that whole area again, then I can do that as many times as I want. But when you actually do finish the game and like go up to the moon and defeat the final boss and it breaks free from that, regardless of whether you've gone to each region in that cycle and cured all their problems, the final cutscene will still show the aftermath of you having saved each and every one of them. So even though their problems get reinstated every time you recycle, at the end of the game, it still feels like I've solved all the problems.
Yeah. Yeah, it does do a good job of when the game is complete, it feels complete. I just feel like getting to that point feels a lot like Sisyphus bringing a boulder up a hill, right? You're constantly going up and then, oh, time's run out. I got to go back and start over again.
Yeah, but if I'm sitting there like, man, like saving Romani from these aliens was such a cool thing. And when you're going through the first few cycles, you don't even know that's happening. And when you stumble upon it and you're like, wow, like there's another person I can say that's going to have real consequences on the rest of the world in terms of now the delivery can make it to like the Clock Town. I was going to say Castle Town, to Clock Town, and you can go in and talk to them at the end because the delivery was made. And you can sit there and watch as they're all sipping their milk on the final day, and different people are there depending on who you've talked to and helped along the way, and you can get different rewards for that. And I love how it is one of the few Zelda games where they're able to do that because they can reset the time.
Yeah, conceptually, it's an amazing idea, and there is no other way to do that game. You can't just take the time element out of it, because then I think the game itself suffers from it. I think it's just the case of, because I don't enjoy the core mechanic and the core loop of it, it's always just going to result in a lower opinion from my perspective on it.
And I think I'm always going to want 100% complete it every time I play, because I feel very cozy playing it. Like I don't feel a rush. I don't feel a panic. I feel like these are my peeps and I'm here to help them and I care about them. And if I was to go through the whole game and get to the end credits and not have, done the Anju and Cafe quest, I'm going to feel like I let them down. I missed out. And maybe that's purely like nostalgia and the fact that I have all of these memorized at this point. It's like I don't have to follow along a guide to know how to complete that quest. Mm-hmm. And so it just is second nature to me. And that's why for a while it was my favorite game, is because I felt like I knew the ins and outs and the schedules of that game.
Yeah, it's the coziness that you have with it. And I can totally get that, because on the cozy note that I like going back to is my number 3, Ocarina of Time. And we mentioned earlier the concept of like randomizers. For those who don't know, any type of randomizer in the Zelda space is mostly they change what the chest contents contain, or item rewards, quest rewards, things like that. They mix them all up, and then you play through a specific seed and it all changes and you have a brand new experience each time. And Ocarina of Time is by far the best game that I've played that has that concept, and it just builds it up and it massively increases the replayability. And it does hurt just going back to playing vanilla in some ways, because it fixes a lot of the issues that people 25 years ago, I think at this point, didn't really have. But the game itself, I think, is just fantastic. And I tend to look at some of these things, especially when you get to the top of a list like this, in terms of influence as well. And that's where you get into Ocarina of Time is almost going to be hurt from here on out with people constantly saying it's the best game ever.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes the narrative about it being less than perfect is mostly just a response of people being like, why is it always considered so perfect, and not just an objective value of its like quality?
Exactly. Yeah. That and Final Fantasy VII, I think, is going to have the same kind of issues depending on how the remake is considered. I haven't played any of it, so I don't know. But with Ocarina of Time, it's very much so many things came about because of it that it will always rank highly in the same way that like Super Mario Bros. Will. And the dungeons are good. The time travel mechanic is kind of nice. It gets into Zelda had this interesting point where it just always wanted to do this big thing that happened at the midway point of the game, and then you replay the same thing but different.
Yeah, and I loved how it brought, as I said, like Link to the Past is the one that introduced this general formula for kind of like an Act 1 and Act 2 in Zelda, and then that ability to move back and forth between them.
Yeah.
And while the future handheld games kind of gave you that back and forth ability very quickly on, I love that Ocarina of Time kind of stuck with like Link to the Past did, and it's introducing you to this whole new world and all of its mechanics. And once you've kind of mastered that, then you unlock the ability to manipulate the world around you.
Yeah, and the only thing that I think hurts that is they kept that for way too long as the Zelda formula for 3D. Because if you think about it, it's all kind of the same, right? You very clearly have an Act 1 and Act 2 in every 3D Zelda game until Breath of the Wild. Right? Be it replaying portions or, okay, now we've done this little thing and now we've got a more big thing to do. But, yeah, in terms of all of that, the music on it is still memorable now.
That's right. I even remember, sorry to interrupt that one, but I even remember when I was going through Twilight Princess, and after doing like the first like 3 things, or I want to say it was split like 5 areas, and then you have to collect the 3 mirror pieces afterwards. And I remember thinking to myself, once I found out I had to do like 3 more dungeons, I'm like, oh, can it be over?
Yeah, exactly. Whereas with Ocarina of Time, it's still in that moment where it is fresh.
Mm-hmm. And it presents it to you at a time where, as I said, you've kind of learned and mastered navigating in this 3D world. And now it's like, all right, here's your real challenges.
Yeah.
Go and figure those out.
And they had a nice way you turn from a kid to an adult. And then that's kind of like, okay, now the real game starts. Now you get like, the Master Sword, you get bow and arrows, you get everything like that. You're replacing boomerangs and slingshots. Like it just feels more like they've leveled you up. Yeah,
like you are growing up with your version of Link there. But on the music, as you were about to go into there, I think the Ocarina of Time soundtrack is also the one that I know the best. Like those songs have stuck with me my whole life.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Like you could put on shuffle the Ocarina of Time soundtrack and I could tell you exactly what spot in the game each song belongs to, because it's so good.
Yeah, it's the difference between, is that this versus, no, that's this music. This is the market music. This is Saria's song.
And it makes sense when you start looking forward to other games and you're like, most of the fire themes play on the Fire Temple one. Most of the water themes kind of play on like the Zora's Fountain theme. Like most wood areas play on Saria's theme. So it definitely established a lot of those. But I'm going to bring this kind of way off course here because we still need to get through our top 2. But my third one is Tears of the Kingdom, and obviously that one came out in the past year, and that is another one that has a lot of callbacks to other things, especially in the music. Like I feel like the Tears of the Kingdom music, it was so minimal.
Yeah.
But every theme in there plays on old Zelda songs.
Exactly. It goes off of like the Zelda world in Tears of the Kingdom is fragmented, and thus the music is, and you're not really given an explanation as to why. So it's kind of fun to theorize. Is it discovery? Was that just the portions that Hyrule world discovered and they made music out of it? Or is it just trying to be more of a ambience?
Mm-hmm. And the way that they were able to take that foundation of Breath of the Wild and just expand upon it in every way. Like, I agree that I would have probably had Breath of the Wild in this spot if I had never played Tears of the Kingdom, but now I have, and I don't want to go back and play Breath of the Wild because you can get around Tears of the Kingdom faster.
Yes.
And I kind of like the way they did the shrines in this one. I didn't, like, sure, they are kind of just arbitrary puzzles in random locations for the most part, but I didn't feel like there was as many obnoxious, out of the way ones where, because like if you're exploring Breath of the Wild, it is very much like the map itself is a puzzle. Whereas I don't feel like Tears of the Kingdom's map is a puzzle. It's more your playground. And that made it just a more enjoyable experience for me. I think after I beat Breath of the Wild, and I didn't even go close to 100% completion.
No.
I didn't want to collect all the Koroks, but I just loved that game through and through. But Tears of the Kingdom, I actually stuck with a lot longer after I'd beaten the game to go around and see all of the shrines, just to explore the depths, not because I needed to progress, but because I was genuinely just having fun exploring.
Yeah, this game was way better than Breath of the Wild in terms of that exploration, and I don't know if that's the world just felt a little bit more to it, because Breath of the Wild, it was big, it was full, but it wasn't alive. Whereas Tears of the Kingdom just feels more like that, and I think that could also be, you had the depths, you had the sky, you had so many more avenues to explore and go off of. Tears of the Kingdom as well was my number 2 on this list. And I did the same kind of thing. I completed way more of it than Breath of the Wild. I did all the shrines. I did near every quest. Did all the depths points, and maybe did about half the Koroks, because those are just way too much in it. It's nice that it has something like that for people that like to do everything, but it's just too much at that point.
Well, I think both of us also are in that position where we have enough games to play that even if like Tears of the Kingdom is a $90 game, like we didn't 100% complete it, but I feel like I got my money's worth out of that experience.
Yes. Yeah. And my goal was to kind of complete as much of it as I could, because I felt like I wouldn't be going back to this game for 4 or 5 years, maybe.
Mm-hmm. And I think out of like my top 6 are all ones that I could pop in and I would love to play the main story again. Tears of the Kingdom, I might have to put an asterisk beside that, because it is such a choose your own path, how you want to go through it. And I think a year or 2 from now, I might want to just try a quick run through of all of the areas and kind of skip a lot of those unnecessary shrines and stuff.
Yeah.
Just to play through it again, because every new area I went to felt like I was on a cool adventure. Like when you go into the depths and find the fire temple there, I was genuinely like surprised that that's how they chose to do it, and that there was just like this huge, massive structure just waiting for you under there. And like moments like that make me want to try it again, but I definitely just need that time to pass to reset my brain before I go and explore them.
Part reset brain, part forget portions, right? Because I know I want to forget aspects of it so that when I do go back to it, I have that sense of wonder again. Because shockingly, that's another one where you go and you see portions of it and you just go, wow, how did they manage to do this?
And that's where I said, when I do something like Wind Waker, every time I get to that fight on Dragon Roost Island, I'm always blown away. And I'm like, wow, like I remembering that they did this on GameCube. And that's where Breath of the Wild did not have those moments for me, other than obviously that initial opening up the world, or like Ocarina of Time, the first time you see Hyrule Field. And, you know, we were like 4 or 5 years old when we saw it for the first time. Yeah. And it was hard to appreciate just how monumental that was in gaming at that time. But Tears of the Kingdom is the first one that I think transcends above that just novelty factor and just becomes like an all-around mechanically sound. There's like well-designed top to bottom.
Yeah.
But I have two that I put above Tears of the Kingdom, and here's where we're going to show my 2D bias, because my number 2 game is Link Between Worlds, and as you touched upon earlier, I do think it was a great way to bring back an old map. And again, we're going to have Tears of the Kingdom, Link Between Worlds. I love when they can take something that was old and a little outdated by a few years in the futures, like advances in technology and just game design, and they can make it feel like a brand new game set on the same overall map. And the way they're able to change it and kind of reward players who did play the original with like little tidbits and Easter eggs, but also just make an entirely brand new game out of it. Like, it's so cool. Like the fact that Link Between Worlds is the first one since like Link to the Past to have some of the same items, like the big bomb flower that can follow you around in the swamp, or trying to think of other ones, because did Link to the Past have the tornado rod?
No.
It had one of those rods.
Link to the Past had the
fire rod?
It had a fire rod and an ice rod.
Mm-hmm.
And then it had the 2 canes, the cane of Samaria.
I don't know. I got one of them tattooed on me.
Yeah.
That's the one that makes it flip.
Oh, that's going to be, that's just a Link Between Worlds one.
Mm-hmm.
The Link to the Past ones did a cube, a block that you could use, and turned you invisible.
But anyway,
or invulnerable.
The reason I think that this sort of redo of the same map is always going to stick out to me personally above something like Tears of the Kingdom is just how fundamentally different you travel about the world. Because, like, sure, in Tears of the Kingdom, you can make vehicles to move quickly and like make a motorcycle to run around the depths at top speed. But that idea of, instead of a mirror to transform back and forth between light and dark, you quite literally can just merge into any flat surface of wall and travel between, well, not between any, but on anywhere there's like a rift, you can travel back and forth between a light and dark world. And that concept just took what Link to the Past had and really flipped it on its head. And that, to me, is why I remember my experience with A Link Between Worlds more than A Link to the Past.
Yeah, I think in terms of single game mechanics, I think that's one of the best ones.
Mm-hmm.
Just such a cool concept, being able to just go into a wall, kind of picturize yourself, and then traverse through there.
And I think that made it a 10 out of 10 game for me. Just the number of times I stopped and might not have had those moments where I'm like, wow, but moments where I'm like, oh, that is so clever. I can't believe they did that. Or like, oh, that makes so much sense. Or just a big grin on my face. And at the end of the day, that's what put these top 2 as my top 2, is just, I was smiling the whole time playing through Link Between Worlds.
Yeah, it's the games is fun.
Yeah.
They're just fun games.
But for me, the big thing that we're going to disagree on here is I loved the item system. And it really did make it feel like if I was going through those first 3 dungeons, like I could have bought all the items I wanted, but if I die, I lose all the ones that I haven't upgraded yet. So until you do like the first 3 dungeons and kind of unlock the second half of the world, pretty much, everything before then, if you die, there's consequences. But it's not a difficult game.
No.
And I think when I beat the game and I went back and did it in hero mode, it was the perfect level of challenge too, where doing it in hero mode and knowing I can die very, very quickly from like 2 incorrect inputs essentially made me actually appreciate it as a challenge. Whereas like playing through most of the other games in the series that have some sort of hero mode, it's fundamentally the same game, just you take extra damage.
Yeah, Link Between Worlds had more of a added layer to it, right?
Whereas in Link Between Worlds, yeah, I feel like you are increasing the difficulty, but as a result of that, you are increasing the punishment you receive. And so that made me actually like white knuckle grip tight when I was one hit away from death, trying to make it out of temple, like being like, I can't finish this in this life bar. And being like, so there's multiple times I had to bail out of a temple and return to it. So I think, and the fact that I enjoyed the game so much the first time through, I played the hero mode immediately after because I didn't want to stop playing. And I 100%ed it, like all the Maya-Mayas.
Yeah.
Out of all of the things that have a 100% completion box to check off, that is my favorite in any Zelda.
I think, and I think you're right. I think I would say the same because it didn't feel like you were really going out of your way for them. Mm-hmm. It just felt like, yeah, let's go find them. Let's like, oh, there it is.
And even the way on the map, it will kind of break each section up into different colored blocks and have a number on it to show you the number of Maya-Mayas there. And I felt like even if it just said 1, it was a reasonable enough space and they're easy enough to find that I did not need a guide to get all 100 anytime I played it. And I've beaten this game now like 5 or 6 times 100%.
Yeah.
Because I want 100% each time. But there's one game that I want 100% more often than that, and that is Link's Awakening. And there is very good reason for that, is because I used to do speed runs of Link's Awakening, and when I played it originally on my Game Boy, I fell in love with it. I think for me, it is not the most mechanically complex. It's not the biggest world, but it is just packed to the brim with little secrets and tidbits, and every character on it, like there's not many characters because each one on it is so fully fleshed out and has many uses. Like even if you don't want to spend time like hanging out in the original town, almost every single character there shows up later on in your adventure. Like you could talk to O'Rira if you want, or you could just talk to him on the phone booth throughout the game where he's giving you little tidbits on where to go forward. It was the first one to introduce like a fishing mini game, or all these little side games like the trendy game, the trading sequence, things like that. And that really stuck out to me. But I always told myself if they ever do a remake of Link's Awakening, that's the one I'm going to do speedruns of. And when they announced it, I remember I was on a treadmill watching the Nintendo Direct, not live because I had to work that day, but I was just on the treadmill watching it. And they dropped the trailer for Link's Awakening on Switch. And I saw that game and I was like so floored. I like stopped on the treadmill. I went over to the couch and I laid down. I remember I had like tears in my eyes. I was so excited because I'm like, there's no way. And as soon as it came out, I learned the speedrun routes and I practiced for hours and hours. And in like a 4-month span following it, I played it about 200 hours. I was live streaming it and ended up getting a world record time for the hero mode. And I was top 10 in the any percent, and I was second place for the 100% runs. So like I knew every single pixel of that game inside and out. And even going back last year when it came out on the Nintendo Switch Online and playing through the original Game Boy game, I appreciate it more than ever. And for some reason, it's just the fact I can play through that whole game in 2.5 hours makes it just a pick up and play anytime. And I just love showing people, love talking about it.
Yeah. And it's more, you just know everything about it. And it's nice that even through speedrunning, you didn't lose anything with it.
Like, if anything, it made me appreciate it much more because I fully understand why certain enemies are placed in later dungeons because like they're basic mechanics of how you fight them or like navigate around them gets more difficult as you progress, and it's constantly throwing curveballs at you. So it is a very simple like 2-button at a time sort of system, like one more than Link to the Past had, but I still feel like the interactions you can have between any two items there, like being able to do the bomb arrows when you discover that for the first time,
Yeah.
or dashing and jumping with the feather. And so for me, it improved on A Link to the Past in a huge way. And I think even though other games that came after it in the 2D series look better, they just don't play better.
Yeah. I could see that, especially from a handheld perspective. Just there's not a lot to a Game Boy cartridge versus a Game Boy Advance, a DS, something like that, right?
Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's my number one because I have the most nostalgia for it.
Yeah.
And I love every little square of that world.
That's the thing. Like with everyone's favorite games, I always figure there's going to be a huge amount of nostalgia attached to it.
If you couldn't tell from my 3 minutes straight rant, I can't wait to see the time on that.
Right? It's okay. It's worth it though. My number one is same kind of vein. It is my favorite game. It has a huge amount of nostalgia to it, stories with it, and that's going to be A Link to the Past. So A Link to the Past is one of the games I used to play it a ton when I was really young. And it was one of the games that my parents had to eventually limit both my brother and myself's video game time. Because we would just go and we'd play it, Super Nintendo, any of the games like that. So it's like, well, if I knew at 4 or 5 that I really liked this game, imagine when I actually got good at it. Because I remember my first completed game of it had 571 deaths. 571 deaths.
Does it keep track?
It keeps track. So when you
on the
overworld,
screen,
yeah, when you beat the game, it has a number with it, and that's how many times you died. But I love near everything about this game. I like the fact that, as I said earlier, with the Light World and Dark World, I always thought it was really cool that it managed to do both. That it had both on the same cartridge. I thought that's so cool, how much game is in here. I really enjoyed the combat of it. I find it just flows really well. I like exploring it, finding out where everything is. It didn't feel like it was overburdened. It felt like every item was useful. Because what often happens with Zelda games is you have the item that you get in the dungeon, you get to beat the dungeon with it and maybe one other thing, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And with Link to the Past, it always felt like you had some items that were only good for a couple heart pieces, but it's cool that they had that there. It's cool that you have items that, like the hammer that you get, the magic mallet, I think it's called. You use that to beat the boss, and then you use it in 5 other dungeons. It's nice that it has that aspect to it.
Well, that's something I really like about Link's Awakening is once you, say, get the hook shot, every dungeon after it will require the hook shot.
Yeah, right? It's just such a nice change, especially going back to it when you play some of the more new Zelda games. And the big one that's always against that is Twilight Princess. To me, Twilight Princess is infamous for, oh, you got this item, the ball and chain. Well, it's useful in the ice dungeon. That's it. And then there's really nothing else that is used for. Whereas with Link to the Past, you can go through and there's really, I used to have the player's guide, and I think it said that there's 5 items that you don't need to beat the game.
Like in A Link to the Past?
In A Link to the Past, yeah.
So that gets your little randomizer brain a-cooking.
Exactly. So when you do a randomizer of the game, it's like, okay, now so many more things are useful in it. Unless you're getting the Cane of Burna or Quake, because you need some of the medallions to open up dungeons. So it's there's just so many added layers to it. And just the exploration of it all. Like you said, going to get the flippers, having to figure out where to go for that. It just really just all encompasses everything. It's the first one that really does the split where you do 3 little dungeons and then you fight some kind of boss or some kind of scene happens to get into Act 2.
Did it also have Pegasus boots?
Yes.
And I think that was also a fundamental change to the way you played the game from that point on. And there's a reason like it showed up in every 2D game after it, some way to dash quickly.
Yeah, because if there's anything that I know how I play, it's playing things quick. Maybe not going into speed running or anything like that. I always felt like if I were to speed run Link to the Past, I wouldn't enjoy it as much. And I think that's just the mass repetition of it all. But it could also just be, now that randomizers are a thing, it just adds more to it. But having the Pegasus boots, you bet I was using that all the time. And you had ways to like go in and change everything. The cool little Nintendo Power things where you have the Chris Houlihan room, where it's like something that's just a secret room that a winner got to have something in a game. I think that's just super cool. I always like the music in it. I think it has some iconic Zelda tracks, not to the level of Ocarina of Time or anything, but the initial intro music is there, the Dark World theme, even the Light World theme, like those main ones, you could just immediately know.
That's right. I think the Super Nintendo sound chip was very suited to like Mario type things. And but games like Zelda or Final Fantasy is on there that have more of like this orchestral, like brassy instruments and whatnot. They do sound really good.
Yeah.
On Super Nintendo. Just maybe a bit of a random question that might be part of a topic for another time, but obviously I think when they did the Link's Awakening remake, they improved on the Game Boy version in so many ways, and any potential frustration you might have had with the Game Boy version, like smoothed out, gone. Like the fact they put like the shield, sword, and Pegasus boots as permanent buttons.
Yeah.
It might have made it a little bit quote unquote easier, but it's also, you know, like at that time, like 20-plus-year-old game, it did need some improvements to make today's kids not as frustrated. If you were to do a Link to the Past remake, would you be excited, or what would you want to see improved or changed?
I don't know if there's really anything, because Pegasus boots are on its own button anyways, as are swords. The shield Link just always has out in front of him unless you're attacking, so things like arrows and that will just bounce off anyways if you have it. And every other item would just go to Y. So I guess if anything, you would maybe want to have better use for the other buttons. Like, because you could only, if you look at it as 3 of the 4 buttons were already taken up, you only had space for one item. I would maybe want a second item as an option.
Yeah, just to minimize on some of those swapping back and forth, like...
Yeah, it's the menu management. Like, the big one, Ocarina of Time has it where on the randomizer, you have all the boots on D-pad, so you can just quickly switch between them. And maybe if they had something like that where you got to hotkey items, like arrows, bombs, and that'd just be way easier.
Well, even other remakes, like the 3D Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, they just gave you 4 inventory slots at all times with like 2 touch buttons.
Yeah.
You know, something like that. So I think increasing in the number of inventory slots is a pretty common thing in remakes that just smooths out the gameplay experience. But
yeah, but in terms of anything else, I don't know if I would, just because I like the art style. I would be worried about the kind of art style they would choose. As an example, I will never play Brilliant Diamond or Shining Pearl because I don't like chibi style. And And honestly, if you were to look at Game Boy as like a 4-bit system that got turned into like this very cartoony toy remake, and at first my reaction was like, I was like in tears crying. I was like, they're doing it, but the more I thought about it, the more I was like, I don't know about this art style. Yes.
It might not be it, but I love that game so much that I got over it, and now I love it. And
yeah, I think that art style works with it too, though, because it's not, there's something to it. It's a little bit more lively. Whereas I find with, especially with the chibi style, it's like, there's the face and that's all you can kind of think of.
And Link to the Past also just had more color, had more just pixels on screen. So it's harder to kind of pick your own art style to remake it in.
Yeah, it's a very colorful game. Even the Dark World uses a lot of oranges and purples, and little bits of blues in that to just pop a little bit more. Oh, yeah, there's our definitive.
The list.
The definitive top 10 Zelda lists.
Yeah, and if you disagree with any of them, you're probably wrong. No.
Yeah.
I'm very curious, like, when people say, like, Wind Waker is their favorite of all time, or obviously many people say Ocarina of Time, and I'm curious, like, what their thoughts and feelings are, what leads them to say, like, this world stands out to them more, it's more important to them as a person than some of our favorites.
Yeah, because it's all your own opinion and choice. I'm sure some of it has to do with age, right? Late 20s is going to have a little bit different of an opinion compared to early 20s, teens, late 30s, early 30s.
Well, I'm even looking at my top 5, and I'm like, Link's Awakening remake came out in 2019. Link Between Worlds was 2013. Tears of the Kingdom 23. Majora's Mask had a remake in 17. Skyward Sword had a remake in like 21.
Yeah,
2021.
Like that.
So I'm like, all 5 of them have been updated or pushed out in like the last 10-year span. So I believe that like Zelda as a whole is getting better as time goes on.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's not beholden to genre constraints, right? It's not a platformer that you have to try to find something innovative and fresh with like some platformers do. It's a Zelda game. Zelda games are kind of their own self-contained adventure game.
Yeah, whereas like 3 out of your top 4 haven't been changed or updated in more than 10 years. So that's where I'm curious. Like it just shows that we have different priorities and things in our games, and maybe there's more nostalgia in yours. Yours is, as you said, you are more about the mechanics of the game.
Yeah, the mechanics, the history of it, the context within, or it's just how much you've played them, right? Mm-hmm. The older games, in my mind, I just have played more.
And mine are, I would say, potentially a little more arbitrary on the sense of, I just love this game and I will fight to the dying
ears.
Yes, going to cover my ears because I disagree. If you think that Link's Awakening kind of sucks, I'm like, nope, it is perfect and you just played it wrong.
Yeah. And then there's some of the games, obviously, that either we haven't beat or haven't really played to give it an honest shot that wouldn't make a list. Because honestly, with Zelda games, you probably have 15 or so that could reasonably make a list.
Yeah. So what Zelda games of the mainline series haven't you played before?
Zelda 2. I've never played Zelda 2 enough to really get a good grasp of it. And I find Zelda 2 falls into that NES games trying to figure out what works and just try out whatever.
Yeah, where it's not a established formula at that time. It's just trying something else because the first one is successful and they weren't sure where to go with it.
Yeah, it's at the time where you don't necessarily know if you want to do the same thing but different or if you want to try something else. The Seasons games I haven't beat. I haven't really played much of Ages. I do like Seasons more than Ages from what I played. I find the time travel mechanic in Ages just be kind of, okay.
Well, and that's where I don't know why, but Ages just didn't stick out to me. And I was sitting there thinking maybe because I love Link's Awakening so much, the other ones on Game Boy just are never going to hold a candle.
Yeah.
Because I know Link's Awakening so well. But then when I played Seasons, I'm like, oh, it's crazy how different these two are and how the overall theme of one being more puzzle focused and one being more combat focused. The combat focused one had just the right amount of puzzles.
Yeah.
Whereas the puzzle focused one just had too many.
Yeah. Then you have Four Swords I haven't beat. Four Swords Adventures, the GameCube one. It's a good game. I like it. It's just, it's hard to play a Zelda game that's meant to be multiplayer solo.
Yeah. Triforce Heroes, anyone?
Yeah, exactly. Haven't found that. I don't think I have a third person that has the game that's around us. Spirit Tracks I haven't beat.
So Spirit Tracks is, for me, the only one I've never even played.
Yeah.
And I love Zelda, and that was my goal, was to do them all last year, but I'm going to have to probably do that one in the next few weeks. But I'm excited to play it, but I definitely don't think it's going to crack my top 10 because like Phantom Hourglass was on the verge, but yeah. I think I just put it there because it's different and not because I want to go back to that story and that setting time and time again. Just something about those DS graphics where it's worse quality than Nintendo 64. But as I said, like it is very different from how you interact with the world in many other Zelda games. That makes it very cool.
Exactly.
So I'm curious how I'm going to feel about Spirit Tracks. And
because I know Spirit Tracks is not well regarded.
Maybe when we're doing a roundup of games we've played recently soon, I'll be talking about my experience with Spirit Tracks and reflect on our list that we made today.
Yeah, you're like, will it make it? Maybe. Maybe not. But I think that's all we've got today. What do you think? What do you think next episode will be?
I think we're going to do a little dive into some of the games that Rare has made. Talk about our favorites and kind of where things fell off after the golden age of like Conker's Bad Fur Day, which I think was the last major one that I believe is just like a 10 out of 10 game. And pretty much everything since then has kind of flown under the radar.
Yeah. Other than their most recent one, one's got some players on it. Because they've got Sea of Thieves is the most recent, and then they've got Everwild or Evenwild. I think it's Everwild coming out.
I was going to say that was an upcoming game.
Yeah.
So I think they're starting to find their groove again, but obviously, it was a lot of the same people that we hear about all the time that were a huge part of games like Banjo-Kazooie and Diddy Kong Racing, even moving back before then, things like RC Pro-Am and like Jetpack, like some of those, like they've been around for a while.
Slalom.
Mm-hmm. And of course, everyone's favorite, Donkey Kong 64.
Yeah, we'll get into some stories of last year when we decided, you know what, let's 100% it, but let's swap off. And I think swapping off wound up saving that game for us.
Because I think there's a lot of great Rare games to get into, and I think we have lots of thoughts and opinions because for both of us, we were both Nintendo fans that probably saw it as a huge loss when Rare moved on to Microsoft.
And then maybe in between, we'll play some Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, kind of get an idea of how their first couple forays into Microsoft went.
I thought we were doing this for fun, Nick.
Well, you never know.
To be fair, I've never played it, and I think I would still enjoy it to an extent. For context, though, Banjo-Kazooie, the first, is my all-time favorite game. And like Zelda Link's Awakening is my second all-time favorite game. So we're going to be hitting very close to home for Zack here in these first two episodes.
Yeah, so tune in, and then we'll see where these journeys take us. Have a good day.
Thank you very much.